Hi there, my name is Joe. Welcome back to a video series that I'm making on the Tour de France Fantasy League offered through the official Tour de France website. This is the second in a series of videos. In this video, we'll be going over basic strategy. In the last video, I went over basic rules of the game, navigating the website, etc. So if you haven't seen that video and are new to Fantasy Tour de France, I suggest you go watch that one. If not, this will be a good starting point for you to figure out how to go about making your team and a couple tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years. So, starting out, first we can see that the riders are actually posted up on the website, which is nice. These just got posted a couple days ago. This team I have here is certainly not my final team. It's just a placeholder that I put together so that the website would be populated with something while we're talking about it. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of basic strategy for building your team is spending your stars. So that's the first big decision point you have, and you have to make these decisions about who to add on your team before the tour begins. The way you do that is by spending stars. So the Fantasy League uses a salary cap model, and each rider is assigned a salary. The salary is in units of stars. You start out with 120. You see if I clear my team, my budget over here is 120 stars, and I have to fill up 8 slots. So if you do the math there, that's about 15 stars per rider on average. So you could take 8 average riders, maybe a little better than average riders. But generally speaking, the top point scorers are going to be quite a bit above that 15-star average. And so for every point you spend above 15 stars for any given rider, that means you're going to have to spend less than that many points on a different rider. So it might seem like you have 15 stars to spend on any given slot on your roster, but in actuality, you only really have 10. The reason for that is that the lowest price that you can get for a rider is 5 stars. There are no riders available for 4 stars or less. And so that really does pretty seriously hamper your budget, because let's say you wanted to spend 120 stars on the 6 best riders that you could choose. Well, that team is not eligible to earn any points because you won't have any stars left for those final 2. So if you think about it, each one of these slots on your roster has to be filled with someone that costs at least 5 stars. So that's 8 times 5, that's 40 points that are locked up right away. With the remaining 80 points, then you can choose to replace those minimum cost riders with more stronger riders that are more likely to gain more points. So the first thing I'm going to say about this, though, is make sure that you understand your salary and you understand the decision points you're making with respect to spending or not spending your full salary before the tour begins. So what do I mean by that? I think the basic strategy that someone who's never played this game before might employ is to simply fill up their roster with the most high cost riders that they can possibly fit on the team. Here we go. So I've gotten 3 of the top cost riders, or I should say 4 of the top cost riders, the medium cost riders, and then 3 cheap, close to minimum cost riders. And that looks pretty good. That is, in terms of people that will earn the most points throughout the entire tour, that's a pretty good strategy. You want to use all your points. However, one of the most interesting aspects of this fantasy game is that you can make trades and changes to your team throughout the tour. And so if you start out with a team that costs 120 stars, let's say you want to sell, Remco Evenepoel for 20 stars, and you want to pick up, hold on, let me just clear my criteria once again. And you want to pick up Tim Merlier. Let's say, Remco has a crash and the team's going all in for Tim Merlier. Well, you cannot trade those Remco for Tim Merlier because he costs just 1 star more, and you didn't leave yourself with any buffer of stars to spend left in your budget. What this means in practice is that in order to trade out Remco and pick up Tim Merlier, you're going to have to make 2 separate trades. You're going to have to sell Remco plus one other person, and pick up Tim Merlier plus a rider that costs less than the other rider you sold. This is a big problem because you are limited to only 10 trades throughout the Tour de France. So now, just to make one effective trade, I had to spend two trades. So, really, just to remind you, the currency you use to make trades are credits. So, after the tour begins, if you want to sell a rider, you can't just click this X button and sell them for free. You have to actually spend credits. And you can start the tour with 500 credits, and that 50 credits per trade, that means 10 trades. So, a strategy that I often employ will be to leave some remainder. Sometimes I've left it as much as 5 stars. Other times it's just 1 or 2 stars in my pool, unspent when the tour begins. So you can see if I went with a strategy like this. Actually, that's a bit extreme. Let me maybe pick up a more moderate rider here. So let's say I begin the tour with this team. That means, let's say the first week goes by and I identify that Jai Hindley is really not doing so well. He's really settled into his domestique role supporting Primoz Roglic, and he's not going for any stages on his own. Let's say I want to trade him and upgrade to Primoz Roglic. Well, Primoz costs 4 more stars than Jai Hindley. So if I had spent all of my stars already, I would have to sell both Jai Hindley and, let's say, Ben Healy just to trade up for Primoz Roglic. But since I left myself a budget of 4 here after this tour began, I could just simply trade out Jai Hindley, pick up Primoz Roglic. And in fact, it's often a good idea to make a speculative pick in terms of a GC rider that is the most expensive of any of the folks that you expect to pick up in that role on your team, simply because if you want to sell them, you can pick up anyone else. So, for example, Tadej Pogacar. Let's say Tadej Pogacar drops out, stage 2 of the Tour de France. Obviously, that's a bummer because he usually scores a lot of points. But the good news there is I can trade him because he costs so many points. I can trade him for any other rider in the Tour. And I only have to make one trade. I only have to spend 50 credits to get him off my team. So, to summarize here, be very intentional and purposeful in how you spend your budget, and don't let your budget go down to zero unless you have a specific plan in mind. You want to already be thinking in your mind, what are the trades that you're going to be making and who are the people that you're going to be selling or picking up later in the race? So, for example, an obvious one might be this year's Tour de France is fairly heavy on sprint stages in the first week and a half or so. So it's possible that you might just want to load up on sprinters and pick up, let's say, Philipsen, Merlier, and Van Aert all together, even though you know that you realistically are going to want to be spending these points, or at least a big chunk of these points, on GC riders later in the tour. In the first week, you might know that the GC riders are not going to have as much opportunity to shine, and so you'll index higher on sprinters with the intention of selling them later. Another thing that comes up often is there are some sprinters who outright proclaim to the media that they intend to drop out of the Tour de France after a certain point in time when the sprint stages dry up. You could just have in your mind that this slot, let's say Tim Merlier, if he's been hinting that he's going to drop out after the second week, you could have in your mind that you're already planning to trade this guy out and pick up Vingegaard in the second or third week, a GC rider. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that because you are limited to 120 points, at least in the standard leagues, there are custom leagues where you can have higher budget. There is a pretty hard cap on the number of high-performing, high-scoring riders you can get. It's usually 4. So you can see here I have Pogacar, Philipsen, Vingegaard, Van Aert. These 4 riders are all in the range of 20 points, and some of them a little over 20 points. If I pick up the top riders, it is very unlikely for me to get a 5th person. Now, there are 2 ways that you can get a 5th person. One is to sell your most, or not pick up the most expensive rider. I will mention, in this case, I don't think that's a great strategy because Pogacar is historically one of the safest bets in any fantasy league. But let's say, you know, Roglic came in at a really high cost. You could purposely choose not to pick up him, and instead of picking up someone that costs a lot of points, you could pick up a slightly lower tier leader, let's say Matteo Jorgensen, right? With that, I now would have budget to pick up a fifth person. I can get rid of Healy here and now pick up, say, a Vlasov. So now I've just picked five high, marquee riders that are likely to be scoring a lot of points, which is excellent. You just have to make a determination of that trade-off, getting rid of the most expensive one. Is it worth it? Usually, this strategy is not worth it. Usually, the highest cost riders are priced as such for a very good reason. So, the other way that you can get a fifth rider who's a marquee rider, so to speak, is to wait until after the tour begins and pick up the people who are proving themselves to be punching above their pay grade. So, for example, that's let's say Felix Gall in 2023, where he only cost 13 stars. So he certainly was not one of the marquee riders at the start of the tour that were priced really high. He was actually intending, in that tour, he was going in intending to fully support Ben O'Connor. Towards the middle of the tour, he identified himself as one of the best climbers in the race, and because he was so cheap, he was an obvious pickup for anyone who was closely watching the tour. You would trade out one of your other middling cost riders for Felix Gall because he was scoring as if he was a top rider. But because his cost was that 6 or 7 points less, you were able to get him without sacrificing one of your already established riders. You could just sacrifice a middling or low rider to pick him up. So, in summary here, spend your budget intentionally, do your best to get at least 5 marquee riders. Do that either through spreading the points evenly across 5 slots, or by top loading the first 4 and trying to identify the middle cost rider who's a little bit under cost and is actually going to be scoring in the range of the other top performers. All right, so let's move on here. The next thing I want to talk about is spending your credits. And I've already hinted at a few things here. But the first thing you want to do before you even build your team is make sure that you are going to not start off this game with a bit of a handicap. And by that, I mean get the maximum number of credits. By default, when you sign up for this league, you will be given 400 credits because each trade costs 50 credits. That amounts to 8 trades that you can make throughout the tour. But there are multiple ways for you to earn up to 100 extra credits. They're calling them gifted credits here. The first is by simply playing the quizzes that are offered through this website before the tour begins. So you only have a few days left to take these quizzes. If you score 2,000 or more points, you can get the full 100. If you score between 1,000 and 1999, then you'll only be given 50. What that means is you're going to want to earn the other 50, the other 50 gifted credits in the other way. And the way that you would do that is by going over to the Leagues tab, clicking Invite Friends. And you can use this wizard here to invite a friend or generate a link or send an email to invite friends. If you refer 2 to 3 people, and that means they have to receive the email and then come here, create an account and sign up, then you can get an additional 50 credits. Note that you cannot go greater than 100 free credits combined across these 2 methods. So if you get 100 credits just from the quiz, you don't have to mess around with any invites. You've already got what you need. Note that this is an online quiz, and as such, you have access to the internet while you are taking this quiz. And so one of the things that I certainly do is if I don't know the answer to a question, I will quickly look it up on the internet, and you have enough time that you probably won't get the maximum points for any of the questions that you don't know, but there's no reason why you shouldn't get nearly all of the questions right because you can simply Google them. It wasn't too difficult for me to score greater than 2,000 points, but I will admit that I did know some of these answers without looking them up, so it was easier for me to get a higher score. All right. Once you've secured the maximum number of credits, then you're safe. You got 500 credits, you got 10 trades that you can make throughout the tour. You're going to want to find opportunities to single sell as much as possible. I already mentioned this in the last section in terms of maximizing your stars, but it's worth reiterating because it's the single most important strategic tip that I can offer. Try to make sure that you can effectively make 10 trades or close to 10 trades instead of simply making 5 trades. And I see all too often someone will maximize their points in the first 4 riders or 5 riders. They'll have nothing to spare. And then when someone drops out of the race, they'll have to sell 2 separate riders to make a trade. I already went over that a few minutes ago, but let's just say I had Lescano here, and Van Aert drops out of the race, and I want to pick up Merlier. Well, the problem with that is Van Aert costs 19 stars and Merlier costs 21. So if I really want to pick up Merlier, I got to sell Van Aert and Lescano. Even if I didn't really gain very much by getting rid of Lescano, I had to sell him because I simply needed to dig into the points that he was occupying on my team and trade him in for someone that costs a little bit less, let's say Leknessem, right? That means I effectively made 1 trade, but I had to spend 100 credits to sell 2 riders to make that trade. That is a nightmare. Sometimes that's acceptable. In fact, I'll do that at certain points in the tour. Sometimes I'll sell 3 riders at once to do a sort of 3-way trade, but you want to make sure you're gaining 3 good riders out of that trade. Or in the case of a double trade, you're gaining 2 good riders. Now, if I go back there and I had, Van Aert and Lescano, and I knew that both Merlier and Leknessem were doing really well, well, then that's a fantastic trade. It's worth selling both Van Aert and Lescano to pick up Merlier and Leknessem. In that case, let me clear my criteria. Yeah, Merlier. In that case, I've just spent 2 trades to pick up 2 riders that I wanted to pick up. That's totally acceptable. But you never want to be reluctantly picking up a cheaper rider when the person you sold to pick them up wasn't really doing that bad, and you could have kept them on your team, but you simply had to sell them to free up some points. At a high level, the way that I suggest beginners approach this Tour de France Fantasy League with respect to credits is, in the first week, make some safe bets. Pick up Pogacar. Pick up, Philipsen or Merlier, the premier sprinters. Maybe pick up Van Aert because he's just always historically finds a way to score points. Do not try to speculate on who's going to be the best undercosted rider. Don't try to find the next Felix Gall. Try to make pretty safe bets, knowing that the safe bets that you've made, which are usually 4 expensive riders, are going to be pretty quickly traded out. At least 2 of them are going to be traded out to pick up the undercosted riders that you identify once there's been a few stages for those undercosted riders to really prove their worth. In the second week of the tour, that's where you really want to lock in your high hitters. If Jonas Vingegaard has already picked up the yellow jersey in the first week, don't be that guy who waits till the 3rd week to pick him up. You're giving up all those free points of those 7 additional stages that he could be earning you 50 points a stage just from having the yellow jersey in addition to whatever he earns during the stage. Don't miss out on those because you were quick to adopt the people that are very likely to win the tour or win the green jersey. By the 2nd week, most serious competitors should have the person who's looking most likely to win the green jersey and the yellow jersey. In the 3rd week, you really want to hold your trades as much as possible, minimize the changes you make, so that going into the last 1 or 2 stages where the jerseys are fairly settled, you can then make sometimes like a 3 or 4-way trade in the last 2 stages to really solidify the maximum possible points for you on the last stage when all the points for the jersey positions are doubled or tripled. So that's the high level strategy. First week, safe bets. 2nd week, establish your big hitters, identify the people who are likely to win the jerseys, pick those guys up if you can. 3rd week, hold. Try not to impulsively sell off a good rider and pick up the person who just won the stage yesterday. Try to hold during that 3rd week if you can. And then on the last day or 2, that's where you spend all of your remaining trades to make the best possible team. And in fact, in a subsequent video, I'm going to be going through how I make those final trades by looking at some data that I've been collecting throughout the whole tour. So I'll be going over my spreadsheet and my strategy there in a subsequent video. All right, so we've talked about high-level strategy for spending stars and spending credits. Now I want to talk a little bit about rider selection because that's really what I imagine most people are coming here for. I'll tell you in this particular video, I'm not going to be giving you advice about which riders are looking good this year, right now, ahead of the 2024 Tour de France. I'm going to be giving you general strategies that are applicable to any year, any Grand Tour that uses this fantasy system. So the first is make the obvious picks. Don't be that guy who didn't pick up Pogacar. I know it was a very different type of league, but in the Fantagiro, the fantasy cycling game for the Giro d'Italia this year, Tadej Pogacar was the clear favorite going into the Giro, and he was also priced clearly much higher than the rest of his competitors. But guess what? Every single team in the top 100 of that league had Tadej Pogacar on it. There was no one who was able to outsmart the system and find a team of misfits that were undercosted and outscored Tadej Pogacar just because he was so dominant. Now, is it likely that he'll be as dominant at the Tour de France? No, the competition is going to be much stiffer, but he's also not that much costed that much higher than anyone else. So pick the obvious picks, right? Pick up Pogacar. If you believe in Philipsen, pick up Philipsen. If you believe that Vingegaard's in really great shape and he's hungry to pick up the yellow early in the Tour, pick up Vingegaard. Make the safe picks. Don't be a hero. Next thing here, look for riders that are eligible for more than one category. So the most obvious one here is the yellow jersey and the white jersey. So let me just pull up the list of riders real quick. All right, so if we look at this page, obviously these lists are provisional, but this is just a Wikipedia page that has all of the riders that are expected to participate in this year's Tour de France. Sort by age. Look for anyone who is age 25 or younger. You do have to be a little bit careful because there's a couple folks who are 25 but are still not eligible for the white jersey. In order to be eligible for the white jersey, you have to remain 25 for the duration of the calendar year. So basically that means you have to pick up people who were born in 1999 or later. So Zangel, unfortunately, missed the cutoff by 13 days or whatever. So even though he's 25 right now, he's going to turn 26 this year, not eligible for the white jersey. So anyone Alexis Renard and above is eligible for the white jersey. So, for example, Tom Pidcock, Matteo Jorgensen, maybe if Jonas is not feeling great, right? Who else? Remco Evenepoel, of course. These are the folks Carlos Rodriguez, that are already clearly identified as going for the yellow jersey, but they're also going to be getting points in the white jersey competition for free. So that is probably the biggest piece of advice I'd give to anyone. And in fact, it's interesting that this year is the first year that Tadej Pogacar is not eligible for the white jersey. So in previous years, he was a slam dunk, rock solid pick for every single person's team, just because we knew even if he wasn't going to win, he was going to be close to the lead and he was going to be winning the white jersey as long as he remained upright through the end of the Tour. This year, he's not. So I don't think that's going to make him not a safe bet, but it is something to consider. There's also, when you get later into the Tour, there's also plenty of riders who are doing well in both the mountains competition, the polka dot jersey, and GC. A handful of riders will be doing well in both the polka dot, the yellow, and the white. And occasionally you'll get some folks that bleed over into the points competition. They're like Tadej Pogacar is a great example of someone who scores a lot of points in the green jersey competition. He's never winning that competition, but he's often third place midway through the Tour, or fifth place, or seventh place even. Those points add up. So look for folks who are likely to be doing well in multiple jerseys. The next thing I want to talk about is minimum salary gems. So if we go down here all the way to, we go to riders only priced 5 stars and below, which is just 5 stars because there's no one cheaper than that. You will often want to have at least 2 people on your starting team that cost the minimum, at least 2 people, sometimes 3. And these people are people that you would really, really hope to not have to trade throughout the Tour, because it's such a waste to sell someone that costs 5 stars. It's because you're not gaining any extra points when you sell someone who's 5 stars gaining any free stars because you have to replace them with someone who costs the same amount or more. So you would never sell someone at 5 stars to simply free up salary because it's not possible. You would only be selling them if you picked a bad minimum cost rider and there was a really, really great high performing minimum cost rider. That's pretty rare. You don't find that often. And so, because you are usually stuck with your 5 star picks for the duration of the tour, you really want to do a lot of research to find the gems in this category. And you'll notice this year it's really tough. There's only 11 riders, aren't on this page, and then these other 10 riders who are priced at 5 stars. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to be doing probably a couple hours of research, Googling online, looking at PCS, rankings and World Tour rankings, and looking at recent results and looking at team composition to see who's going to be, on a leash and who's going to be free to go into breakaways. This is one of the most important picks of the tour, ahead of the tour, is picking who your low cost riders are, because you're usually stuck with those picks. Next piece of advice here: don't be afraid to be late to pick up a rider. I quite frequently, especially when I'm playing conservatively, I will quite frequently pick up a rider after they won a stage, or after they've proven themselves to be doing well. I'll give you an example: is Nielsen Powless in actually the last 2 Tours de France. I've picked him up late in the tour both times after he was already doing well. In fact, 2 years ago when we started I think it was the tour where we started in Denmark, he was doing well in the mountains competition before we even got to the mountains. And I was reluctant to pick him up because I wasn't sure, even though he was gaining points every day for holding the polka dot, or maybe he was second place in the polka dot jersey. I was afraid to pick him up because I wasn't sure if he was going to be doing well in the mountains. Turns out he did do pretty well in the mountains. But you don't need to be that genius who picks the person the day before they win the stage. That's very rare. If you really have good intel and you're confident, sure, go make that risky pick. But I strongly suggest picking up safe bets after they've already proved themselves. And so that will often mean you pick up someone the day after they win a stage. And it's not because you're thinking to yourself, well, they won yesterday, they must win today. It's usually because they find themselves, as a consequence of the previous day's win, they find themselves doing pretty well in one of these jersey competitions. So sometimes someone will win a stage from the breakaway, and next thing you know, they're third especially in week one, they're third or second or sometimes even first in the yellow jersey, and they're second in the green jersey. That is, if they've gobbled up all the intermediate sprints and they won a stage, that's a really good way to pick up a lot of points in the middle of the tour. Another point to make is that good sprinters are usually safer bets than good climbers. So you'll notice, I'm pretty sure in every year that I've played this fantasy league, I don't think I have ever started the tour with a climber on my team, unless I felt that they were really a GC guy, a leader who was misclassified as a climber. The reason being that climbers are not likely to win stages based simply on how good they are. Frankly, GC riders are likely to win stages based on how good they are, not the folks who are not leaders of a team and are just going for individual stages in the mountains. However, a sprint is, obviously it's based on more than just your raw power, but it's usually the truth comes out in a sprint, meaning the best team with the best sprinter is going to win much higher percentage of the time compared to their competitors, as opposed to the best climber in a breakaway, right? There's too many variables, and it's also not a sure thing the best climbers even get into breakaways. So definitely I recommend taking high-cost sprinters before you would take any high-cost climbers. And in fact, you'll notice there's usually more high-cost sprinters in the game than there are high-cost climbers for exactly that reason. Also, it's worth mentioning, the best climbers are usually not classified as climber, they're classified as team leaders. So yeah, you can see here, there's many sprinters above 17 points, whereas if we look at climbers, well, there's actually a few this year, but it's kind of hard to count anyone in the top 6 here, because all of them are just domestiques for Tadej Pogacar, Primoz Roglic, or Jonas Vingegaard. So we'll see if they end up being good picks. The other thing I want to make, the point I want to make here, don't make emotional picks. And I'll tell you personally, I was really tempted to pick Chris Froome in 2021. He'd earned me a lot of points in the previous, 5 years or whatever, and I was eager to see him make a good comeback, but I knew that it wasn't likely. So don't be that guy who makes an emotional pick. Similarly, Thomas de Gendt. Every year that Thomas de Gendt has been in the Tour de France, he's a fan favorite, and people love to see him go get that freedom to take a breakaway win, and sometimes he does. But more often than not, he's the workhorse who has to spend all of his energy at the front of the peloton, pulling for Caleb Ewan or whoever was his sprinter in that year. So don't make the emotional picks uh, of the riders whose personality you like, whose story you like. Pick the riders who are going to score the most points. It should go without saying, but it's easy to fall into those traps. Um, Along those same notes, don't pick domestiques. If we look at this list here, let me just clear that up. If we look at this list, Juan Ayuso, Yao Almeida, Jorgensen, Kuss, Jai Hindley, McNulty. These guys are all on a leash until we see in the Tour that they're not. Like, you really can't make a safe bet with any of these guys because you don't know how committed they're going to be to their leader. Now, some of them, you know, classic example here is Yates. Yates, I think they've actually classified as a leader here. Yeah, Adam Yates. He last year was clearly a domestique for Pogacar, but he also was clearly being used in that role to gain a high position in the GC, to maintain himself as a threat to the other GC riders strategically. He's maybe an exception to the rule, and we wouldn't necessarily know that he would be in that role last year. And I wouldn't have recommended picking him up last year, albeit he did end up winning the first stage of the Tour and took the yellow jersey. So for those of you who were brave enough to take him, chapeau. But I strongly recommend avoiding domestiques at the start of the Tour. You know, what this means is often, you know, Mikhail Kwiatkowski is one of the best riders that you should never pick. You know, he's won a couple stages of the Tour de France when he's allowed to get off the leash, but he is year in and year out tied to his leaders and working tirelessly in support of his leaders. And despite him being one of the best riders in the world, at least at times, he's never been a good pick for the fantasy league. I want to call out one exception here. An exception could be the last man in a lead out train. So if we go to like the really cheap sprinters, you know, Morku is an example here. He's maybe not the last man. I think Case Bull's the last man for Cavendish this year. But, you know, the last man in a lead out train is sometimes a good pickup, certainly later in a race, if and when the main sprinter that they're supporting has either identified they're going to drop out of the race or they have already dropped out of the race. If they've, you know, if you're a lead out man and your sprinter is out of the race and you're still here, well, guess what? That's one of the few times in your career you get to go all out for the win for yourself. And as a consequence, some really low cost riders sometimes that you wouldn't expect to be doing well in stages are able to do well in stages. So that's one exception to the domestique rule. I don't want to talk too much about this point, but another point to make is just do your research. Make sure every person on your team, you know what their role is on their team in the Tour de France. And it's easy to just Google their name, you know. Google the name of Wout van Aert and figure out what is the team saying when they announce their roster for the Tour de France. Are they saying he's going to be working in support of Vingegaard? Are they saying he's going for another green jersey? Are they saying that he's just going to you know, see what he's capable of before as preparation for the Olympics or, you know, whatnot? Do your research, figure out what people's roles are, and that research, very basic research, will allow you to avoid some of the pitfalls I mentioned before, such as accidentally picking a domestique. You don't want a domestique on your team unless you have a really good reason for it. Similarly, you want to look at teams, like look at the whole team and what the team strategy is. And I'll give you a really good example. Bahrain Victorious, they have at times, you know, maybe they're not the best example because they do have a lot of really great riders, but at times there are teams such as Bahrain Victorious, or actually this year's Israel Premier Tech team is a better example. There are teams that outright state from the get-go that they are not here in service of a GC leader. Israel has done that this year, actually. They've said that they're hunting stages. I don't know if I really believe them because Derek G's looking pretty good, and I have a feeling that he's going to want to stay up high in the GC competition as long as he can. But they have a very strong team that is specifically been advertised to the to the world as a team of stage hunters. Well, when you need to pick up those really cheap riders, these are the teams you want to look for, right? Um, Schwartzman, I'm actually not familiar. Is that Max Schwartzman? I'm not familiar with Schwartzman, but he might be a good pickup as a low cost rider simply because we know he's not really here to go for a leader. Uh, as I say that, I do have to be careful because they do have Pascal Ackerman on their team, so it's possible that Schwartzman is part of the lead out train for Ackerman. But beyond that, on stages that are not sprints, certainly you wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Schwartzman in the breakaway. So these are the kind of teams that you want to pick up your low cost stage hunters from. What you don't want to do is go over to a team like, Visma Lisa Bike and pick up, oh, Jan Tratnik. He's a great rider. He's pretty cheap. Let me pick him up. No, 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 no. Tratnik is going to be spending 21 days working in the service of his leaders, whoever that may be, whether it's, Jorgensen, Kuss, Vingegaard, Van Aert, whoever it is, right? He's going to be working. Similarly, Guessing. I'm not sure if Guessing made the roster. This is a preliminary list here, but if he's on the roster, you probably don't want to pick him up because he's not going to be going in breakaways scoring points. Um, for team leaders, you really only want to pick the ones that are going to be high in the GC. So let me just go back, clear my criteria leaders here. The team leaders are sometimes not just folks that are going for GC. So for example, here we go, perfect example. Geraint Thomas. Geraint Thomas has, I think the Ineos has pretty publicly stated he's not going for GC here. He's working in service of Carlos Rodriguez and or Pidcock. We'll see how that plays out, right? It's not likely that he is going to be the leader of the Ineos team. I mean, they might be playing multiple cards, so we'll see after a week or two, but it's unlikely. Similarly, sometimes you get Alaphilippe in here as a leader. Let me see who else is in here. Yeah, like Buitrago. Yeah, he's going for GC, but he's not going to have the full team behind him. Bahrain wants to win stages. Similarly, G, right? I just mentioned him. He might be going for GC, but they're not putting their full weight behind him. So he's not going to necessarily have the service of the full team. Letsenko is another good, maybe Johannesson, Jan Izagir. These are guys that are classified as leaders sometimes just because of the strength of their team. The rest of their team is not very strong, but that doesn't mean that they're really working in the same role and you can expect them to be performing at the same level as the other leaders. So it's a somewhat dangerous pick to pick a low cost rider that's classified as a leader. Because let's say I pick up Cross, right? And I just spent 10 points or 10 stars on him. I cannot pick up another rider, another leader, even though I've got 24 points to spend here. Let's say I want to pick up Evenepoel, right? I can't pick him up because I'm limited by 3 leaders. I've already got Vingegaard, Pogacar, and Cross. So be careful about picking up leaders who are not high point scorers. Don't look for steals with leaders. Look for steals in the other categories. Right. And the last point I'll make about rider selection is look for the riders who don't have a classification as a leader, a sprinter, or a climber. Those guys are some of the most valuable riders you can find. Pidcock has historically been in this category. Van Aert sometimes is not. Somewhat controversially, Van Aert some years has been an all-rounder and some years has been a sprinter in terms of how they classify him in the fantasy league. These riders can often be very, very valuable. Paulus is another great one because he's scoring a lot of points, but he doesn't take up a slot on your team that is usually reserved for the leaders or the climbers or whoever. So as a consequence, if Van Aert is here in good form to go for the green jersey or at least go for every sprint stage or, somewhat hilly sprint stage, he's a clear pickup because you don't have to spend either a sprinter slot or a leader slot on him. So if I really wanted to, I could pick up 3 sprinters plus Van Aert, and I've seen people that do well in the first week of the Tour de France in years past by taking that strategy. Pick up Pedersen, Merlier, Philipsen, and Van Aert. you've got four of the best sprinters in the world, even though only three of them are classified as sprinters. So look for those really successful all-rounders. They are really valuable picks on your team. With that, I want to move on to some research that I suggest that folks do ahead of the tour. So the first is just familiarize yourself with the rules. Obviously, I'm doing some of the work for you by creating these videos, but come here to this website, read this page yourself, look at the game rules. Furthermore, if anything is unclear to you, make sure you know how to find the official terms and conditions. So if you click on your player profile to the right and then go to more, on this page you can find a button that says terms and conditions. This will enable you to download a PDF. It's available in both French and English, and you can see the detailed rules, the detailed description of the points that are awarded in various ways throughout the tour, all that stuff. Make sure you know where to find information when you need it. The next thing I'll recommend is do your homework every day. And so the most obvious thing that you want to do is pick your team captain, or I should say stage winner bonus. Assign stage winner bonus is the button you press here for every stage. This is, let me just make a complete team here for demonstration purposes. 17. There we go. All right, I've got a complete team. On stage one, let's say this is my team. I can pick Wout van Aert to be my stage winner bonus. He'll show up down here as listed as the stage winner bonus. This was previously called the road captain. This basically means only on today's stage, or tomorrow's stage, I should say, will this rider earn double points for me. They won't earn double points based on how they're standing, how they're placed in the jersey standings, but they will earn double points for any points earned on the road, intermediate sprints, mountain passes, stage finish, etc. Stage one, Tadej Pogačar might be a good pick. We'll see how that goes. The next thing is you want to figure out what trades you're going to make or not make on any given day. And to do that, I suggest a couple really basic things. Watch the stage. That's the first one. Either watch the stage, or if you haven't watched the stage, which I'll admit I don't watch every stage in full. Watch the stage recap that's posted on YouTube. There's a number of different companies that will do a stage recap. Look at the official standings. Navigate to the Tour de France website. It's not up right now, but you can go to the standings page, the rankings page, and see where everyone's standing in the different jersey competitions. Look at who got relegated. Look at who had bonus points either awarded or taken away. Figure out who you want to pick up and drop based on what's coming ahead. And I'll tell you that in the Tour de France, the cream often rises very quickly to the top during a Grand Tour, and the Tour de France in particular. And so after the first sprint stage, sure, you don't know who's going to win the green jersey, but you have a pretty good idea of who's in good form and who's not in good form. So you want to know who was scoring low because they sprinted and they just didn't have it. Who was scoring low because they lost their lead out train due to a crash that broke up their train. Like that's very valuable information that you won't get by just looking at the results. You want to actually see what happened. One of the ways that I do this is by, in addition to watching the recaps, watching the stage itself, I also watch the Lantern Rouge Cycling Podcast recap every day. At least watch the beginning and end of their podcast episode if I don't have time for the full one, because they have a lot of really great insight. They will often tell you who they think is going to do well tomorrow. They'll sometimes be a tiebreaker in my mind if I'm unsure if I want to go for Van Aert as my stage win bonus or Pogačar as my stage win bonus. I'll hear what Patrick and Benji have to say. They often have some pretty good insight as to whether tomorrow's going to be one for the sprinters. Is it going to be a reduced group? Is it going to be a breakaway, or are the GC boys going to battle it out? They'll have better insight than me sometimes. I also regrettably have to recommend that you watch The Move with Lance Armstrong. As much as it pains me to send people his way, I gotta say he's got some people on staff that have very good insight into what's happening in the peloton. Notably, George Hincapie is still in touch, like getting text messages with a lot of the active riders, and he'll have insider information that is really valuable. So I definitely recommend you fast forward through Lance Armstrong promoting whatever snake oil he's trying to sell or talking about the glory days. But once they start talking about the actual stage and what's coming up tomorrow, listen to what George Hincapie has to say. Um, Also, Johan Brunel, JB Squared is another podcast that they hold with him, and he's got really good insight, sometimes insider information that he shares on the podcast. Similarly, Outcomes is their podcast that they have, which is only like 10 or 15 minutes each day, and they go over their analysis of the betting odds. This is free information, so if you've got the time and willingness, go download those podcasts and listen to them. Listen to them on double speed if you want to get through it quickly. But those sources of information are generally pretty reliable for me. I also think it's good to Google the names of any noteworthy riders that you're unsure about. Like, let's say someone got in a crash. You might not know from watching the coverage how they are doing after that crash. However, often news media will be reporting hours after the stage, oh, they're in the hospital, they're withdrawing from the race, or they were seen on the turbo trainer after the stage, and so they look like they're at least good enough to pedal. Like, you will get some reliable information about who's in what state. And I have a couple of times been able to trade someone off my team before they withdrew, which was incredibly valuable. If someone's banged up but they finished the stage, you really don't want to still have them on your team the next day if they're going to end up dropping out anyways, because then you've just wasted a whole stage where you have someone on your team who didn't even race and they're not earning you points. I do sometimes look at the betting odds. I don't necessarily trust the folks who set the betting odds, but there's automation in there that self-corrects if they have it too bad. So sometimes it's useful to check the betting odds just to see if you're way off on your own analysis of what's going to happen in the next stage. And then look at your competitor's team. If you're in a tight race for the lead of a small league, like a private league, amongst your friends, amongst coworkers, look at the other folks that you're competing against, look at who they have on their team, and try to figure out ways that you can differentiate yourself from them so that you're going to earn points on days that they do not earn points. That's really important if you want to win a league. Finally, once you've done all that research, make your trades. If you're going to make any trades, remember you only get to do that 10 times throughout the whole tour. And then select your stage win bonus. You got to do that every day. It's really important to update your stage win bonus. You don't want to have Jasper Philipsen or Tim Merlier listed as your stage win bonus, and then you forget to change it overnight, and the next day they go into the mountains, but you still have a sprinter listed as your stage winner bonus. It's really giving away free points. So with all those tips, hopefully this is enough to get you started. I know this was a fairly long video, but hopefully you guys have gotten something out of this. If you're interested in more tips, I'll be making a couple more videos on some advanced strategy and some data analysis that I do when making my own picks. So stay tuned for those videos. With that, have a good one.